No one remembers anything but story.
That's
We
true.
could talk back and forth. You could, ask me a whole bunch of questions, and then what people are going to remember is basically three things. They're
Mhm.
not going to remember all five principles. They might remember the story about me and my co-author fighting about whether curiosity stays in or not. But
Right.
when you take examples from people who you can Google their work, and these are not just famous people who conquered the world. These are people who made a difference, and they made a difference because of how they approach.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage.
Okay, so everybody talks about networking, but what if everything we've been taught about building professional relationships is wrong? My guest today argues that traditional networking is not only ineffective, but harmful for building the connections that actually matter. David Homan learned this lesson painfully when his years of generous connecting left him stranded. Instead of accepting this reality, he engineered a completely different approach to human connection, one that's built a global community and is now in the book Orchestrating Connection. So, on this podcast, we're going to be chatting a bunch about the writing process, about connecting, and everything that is to do about community architect David Homan. Without further ado, Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
First, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. I think, everybody needs connection, whether or not you're whatever field you might be in, you need to have human connections, build a team around what you're doing, especially when it comes to authors too, which is something we don't always think about. So, some amazing topics we can cover today. But first, let's chat about you. What led you into this world of connections? I mean, it's pretty incredible that you've made it this far, but what exactly led you to this point when you said, you know what, I have to write this in a book and share this with the world?
So, the impetus for the book, Danielle, was that everyone told me I should write a book, and I finally decided to listen to them. I've
Okay.
run now for 10 years a global community. I speak all the time at conferences, events, and within my own network, for which I do 40 to 50 events a year. So everything that I've been teaching to people who are oftentimes the most incredible, highly charismatic, high integrity connectors, people who focus on relationships on the planet, they've all said to me there's something in the way that I approach this that sits above and helps them hone how they think, but
Mhm.
it's equally as practical to somebody just starting out or looking to revise the way they think about not that adage of networking, but really building purposeful community through connection.
Understood. So that's really cool. Then basically the final line does come down to people saying, you know what, you need to write a book. So that's just incredible. But your writing experience also didn't start with just this book. Yeah, I understand you actually released 7 classical albums before writing the book. So kind of
Yes.
like you went from
So
music writing to book writing.
so I was sitting about 15 years ago in this world where I told all my friends I was a composer. They thought it was really nice. They knew I was a composer. No one listened to my music. And then I built a community, even trademarking the term orchestrated connecting. And still, no one listens to my music. If you're held on a Zoom call for me, I now have myself playing piano as the hold music. And then after half the call, somebody will go, "Wait, was that you?" So that world of being a composer was something that is very dear to me, very important, but not something that is going to, hit like some pop song and go viral. So the same resonance I try to find with my music is the way I've built my community to find that person to person.
Understood. So that's first off really cool that you continue to make those music, but you made it more of a community aspect, and in that way, you were able to share it with more people, and who appreciate what you're doing and value the music too. And I can see how you kind of transitioned perhaps some of what you learned from that experience into the book itself, and I mean, of course, the brand is based off that, so really cool there. Um,
But
yeah.
there's one thing to understand about this, and it's not,
Yeah.
oh, me bemoaning that people don't listen to my music. Like, I write it for the love of it. I help one person sometimes with one piece, and that gives them purpose and real understanding in their life. And this is the same way that I view connection. We are sitting in all these different circles and missed opportunities and, depths of relationships sometimes that just don't go as deep as we need. But when you put somebody in front of somebody else that changes the course of their life through that introduction, whether it's a job, a relationship, just a friendship. I just connected two incredible friends of my life who are both now protecting their children from very, very physically abusive relationships. And that was an intro I made to have both of these women know that they are not alone. And that is just as important as getting somebody to a family office or a film producer or to some well-known author or celebrity. The importance of a connection is what matters for what you need, and the right people who hear you or have that ability to make that intro. That's the resonance. That's the reason to do this. It's not just to, how did I network from no one to have a network of some of the most influential people on the planet. It's that I built trust amongst people I care about. Some of them happen to be very influential, and some of them just happen to be very influential people in my life.
Hmm.
And that's enough.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I get where you're coming from there. And I'm assuming then is Noah Askin one of those people and you collaborated on the book with him, is that correct?
Oh, yes. Noah's one of my favorite people, partly because he said he never wanted to write a book, but then encouraged me to write this one. Then we wrote it together, and it recently became a USA Today bestseller. So we made it, so to speak, in that stratosphere of, enough people are resonating with this, and I'll stop using that term after this one.
Yeah.
But what happened was, Noah and I really set out to prove that there was something different in the community that I ran. He interviewed a bunch of people. He said, I think his unfamous literary quote was, "There's a there." And then we dug into what that was, uncovering what made my network different, what made my events different. So when we
Mhm.
wrote this book, it became this amazing collaboration of me with my missives and verbiage of connection and purpose and all of this, and him synthesizing that and adding a lot of the data science and the rigorous academic theories to it to create something that might seem very simple, but is a system, and to back that up by lots of empirical data, research, and practical application.
Got it. And I'm glad that you do have that backup too. Well, first off, amazing that your book is about connections and you were in a partnership while writing the book itself. So I think that just only enhances the importance of having a team by your side, which is just cool symbolically. And then also great that you had that research aspect to it to really ground everything in the science and the facts. Can you walk us through that process a little bit? The process of research. What sort of research was involved in this, for example?
Yeah. So when Noah and I started writing this, I told him there were five principles, and he agreed on four of them:
Mhm.
diversity, vulnerability, generosity, and gratitude. And I said, curiosity is its own chapter. He said, is it a subchapter? I said, no, curiosity is one of the core two components to meeting people. And he's like, well, then, prove it to me. Like, what's so different about this methodology? And I said, you have to combine curiosity with vulnerability because my feeling is, right? This is my part of it. My feeling is every time I go to a conference and I meet 10 people, about three of them are actually curious about me and the others couldn't care. They're really just interested in telling their story. And then Noah dug in, talked to a couple of professors, some from when he trained at Harvard and a few other places, and we figured out there's actually been a lot of research done on this specific subject of curiosity. And about 34% of people you meet will be curious to you when you're curious to them. And the rest don't ask a single question. They might ask about like whether the Giants won or the Seahawks won or the weather, but they're not actually going to ask about you. So we thought, well, what happens when you combine that with vulnerability? You talk about the fact that your kid is anxious or depressed, that your parents are aging, that your dog is sick. And that jumps up to be almost a 3x. So if you're vulnerable with people, you're courageous enough to be so, it's no longer that 34%. It jumps up to the majority of people, if you're vulnerable, will be vulnerable back. And suddenly you'll both be curious about deepening the relationship.
Understood. Right. And thank you for walking us through those that kind of connected us to those principles that are outlined so heavily in your books. That's I appreciate you kind of like giving us an overview there. It's kind of like a sneak peek to what we could expect to see in the book itself. But along with those principles, you also dive deep into something called the impact ask. So what exactly is that? How is that involved in those principles?
So, do you know how easy it is to talk to somebody else and ask them what they need? Obviously, in your profession, you find that, right? Every time you do a podcast.
Right.
How easy is it if that table was turned onto you for you to say in just a few seconds what you need? That's what I call the impact ask. Your passions, how they're amplified, and then the type of connections that you need to move those passions forward. So many people have such a hard time asking for themselves that they're so good at bringing that same information out from other people. And so there's a big emphasis on that for everyone to be unafraid to ask for what they need, but learn how to do it in a way that actually triggers people's thought process about whether they care about this, the bigger picture they can see, and then really the goal, which is what type of introductions or insight could somebody give you because now they understand a little bit more of your purpose.
Understood. Right. Yeah. Okay. I get what you mean by that, and that's a unique way to think about it too. Because I feel like we're always asking others what they need, but why not focus on yourself and your own needs and how best to get that across? Do you have a certain example? Maybe that could help us better frame that. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll give you one of a friend of mine who came to me about 3 months ago. And so I'll just give you some clarifications without actually saying who this person is. So this guy came to me and he said, I have been for the last 25 years of my life an executive at a company. I have been the spokesperson for this company. I have represented them. I have done everything that I can for the company, but I've never done anything about me. And he said that he was going to retire and figure out his next steps. But his entire brand identity, everything was with one of the most largest sports companies on the planet. And I said to him, "Well, what do you want to do next?" And he looked at me, guy in his 50s trying to figure out what he wants to do when he grows up, because most of us think everyone knows what we want to do. We're all figuring it out. But there was a big shift as his kids were getting older of doing something that wasn't just around a lot of the world he was in of sports and sustainability and other places. So I made him really distill it down to naming several different sporting events, one specific sports team, and then actually some of the people that he wanted to talk to that he hadn't gotten access to. And I
Mm,
smiled during it because when he went that specific, and this is somebody I've known for 5 years, because I built this large scale purpose driven network, I had two of the three people he wanted to talk to as people I knew. And the third one is somebody that I think a friend of mine knows. That turns out to be true. So the more specific and granular you get, whatever the ask might be, the more easy it is for somebody to know if they can actually help you rather than placate you. Because a lot of people want to be helpful, but
right.
unless you can actually be helpful, in my world, don't offer.
Understood. Okay, yeah. Well, thank you for giving us that example. It really grounds it into practice for us, lets us visualize it. And I'm sure within the book you probably include a lot of examples like that, like stories and just tales of other people who've gone through this, so our readers can really picture it. Is that true too? Is that something that's been woven into the book? Some stories and real life examples.
Of course, because no one remembers anything but story.
That's
We
true.
could talk back and forth. You could, ask me a whole bunch of questions, and then what people are going to remember is basically three things. They're
Mhm.
not going to remember all five principles. They might remember the story about me and my co-author fighting about whether curiosity stays in or not. But
Right.
when you take examples from people who you can Google their work, and these are not just famous people who conquered the world, these are people who made a difference, and they made a difference because of how they approached their work and how they built community around them. You can't have a book about community without highlighting some of those best examples. I was lucky to have so many. We have about 20 in the book.
Oh, great. That's awesome. And they all came from lived experience, pretty much.
100%. Actually, not just lived experience, ongoing. These are people who are literally still working on what we are talking about and sharing about them. These are often their life's journey. They're just at enough of a point in it that we can highlight how they started or how far they've gone.
Understood. Got it. Well, this is actually a great time for us to transition into more of the writing process itself. I mean, we talked a little bit about the stories and which stories to include and leave out, but then you also have that mixed in with what we said before, like the research, the anecdotes, the framework. So how do you balance all these different elements? I'm assuming there's a pretty intensive outlining phase. Was that correct, or did it kind of just flow naturally?
The outlining phase was essential because I've like waxed esoteric about this for so long that I could just go on some verbose tangent of talking about honor or gratitude or vulnerability
Right.
or even the way that my community works. In the end, we had to figure out how to tell something that could work in two different ways because we didn't write a book about business. We didn't write a book about self-help or personal growth. We wrote a book that sits in between those because our argument was that the self work that you have to do then informs the way that your community around you can elevate as you insist upon that. But the
Mm.
same thing for you to do that self work, you have to build consciously the community around you. So we decided in the end that there were, three parts to this process. We outlined that. We told a couple great stories to illustrate it, and we really started by proving that the community that I run, which is called Orchestrated Connecting, is the prime example of how this was a life and lesson learned, ongoing, rather than just some theories that we should network differently, that we could curb our loneliness, that we could find more passion or how to ask for what we need. There's a lot of amazing books, amazing thought leaders who each focus on a part of this. I've tried to look at this, Danielle, as the systems approach. And so we had to figure out how to illustrate that system, how to then ground it in really practical data and narrative around the principles, and then how to make it a practical playbook. Chapter 11 is literally a chapter where if you're trying to build a community or own yours, it walks you through all of those steps. And so it's meant to be something that is actionable, and every call to action at the end of each chapter are practical steps people can take because we all might think we have a diverse network, but when we're forced to write it down, the data often proves much different than the way we perceive our diversity of our network to be.
Understood. Yeah, thank you for kind of showing us that planning phase. I think for a lot of authors, we struggle with that. You have a lot of content to put in there, just like you did, right? But what's the best method for us to organize, the best way to portray it and show it to our readers in a way that's engaging and logical? It's hard. So it's good that you had a process that worked for you, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we were lucky with it. No, we know it
Yeah.
did a lot of work in taking and helping us, both of us, combine our tone to be one voice.
Mhm.
And in that, to really not make it be, David did this great thing, pay attention to this great thing, because all I've done is channel the incredible excellence of thousands of people in my network and try to distill that into something that's practical. A lot of that process then became an editing process. What was chapter 5, which was for mine like the heart of the book, the musicality of connection, using musical terms, all of this part, anyone who reads this book will see none of it because we cut the entire chapter. And that decision itself made the book, even though it was for me the heart and soul of the beginning of how I viewed orchestrating connection.
Understood. Right. And I like how you tied it back to orchestrating connection, by the way. That's perfect too. Well, yeah, it's something to be learned here for everybody. And so everyone could take a page from your book when they're writing their own outlines and their own strategies for their own books. So is there a specific chapter that you think is more challenging to write other than others?
I mean, the most challenging to write, with the acknowledgement that Noah and I are both white men in our 40s, also Jewish, was the chapter on
Okay.
diversity.
Mm,
I had a bunch of different friends of color whom some we feature in that chapter. Read it to make sure that we were not being culturally insensitive and the primary point was getting across, because
right.
we live in such an explosive age for what that word means or how it's been cut out of our society. But for me, like the thing I tried to emphasize is like diversity is any part of it. If you go to an authors event and it's just authors in the tri-state area, they can't tell you what it's like to speak at bookstores outside of where they live. If you're part of an immigrant community and everyone around you is from Central America, that's not diverse. That's a community of just that. And so we really had to emphasize this in a very culturally sensitive way, that the strategy of diversity is not something to be downplayed. And the
Mm.
more diverse your network that trusts you, the more circles and doors open. Because when you're around people who just talk like you and think like you and look like you know, it's like when somebody serves you a buffet and it's just eggs for the entire buffet. Like, you might want French toast. You might want
Right.
oatmeal. You might want, as I just had this amazing hotel in San Francisco, you might want congee for breakfast.
Hmm.
And so all of that variety is essential, but to argue that as an essential core was incredibly hard to do well. And I think we pulled it off. There will always be somebody who has problems with some part of what we write. But I just wanted to be clear, especially for everyone listening, that, we really sought out to prove that the way I approach diversity um, meant the community I run and therefore the network power I have is stronger because I have women and people of color, stronger because I have veterans and people in focus in mental health, stronger because I have cultures from all around the world and people from their 20s through their 90s. The more monochromatic, the more you end up with something that makes you feel good on the surface. And so that made that chapter really hard to write, to be systematic. We cut out two of the stories in it because they didn't fit, even though they were great friends to feature. So we could get something that was streamlined to prove no one has a network as diverse as it should be, even if they actually do have a diverse network.
Understood. Right. And so that I can see that's really challenging to write, especially in today's day and age. You need to be very um, particular about what you're saying and the verbiage you use. So it's really great that you asked many different people to read that chapter. I think that's something we can should kind of touch upon a little bit. The idea of sending pieces of your book or chapters to other people and getting their input. It's kind of like a built-in beta reading system. Did you do that for a lot of different parts of the book just to get some feedback? How did that work for you?
Every single part.
Okay.
People
Such a
who would
great
come to my
idea.
events, I sent them the chapters on what it was like to be in an event, and they added more color and nuance I didn't know because their experience was different than mine. I sent a couple people how we open and close the main parts of the book, which is this dream of you walking on stage and being at a piano, but everyone in the room being a stranger in the concert hall. And then we also, the end of the book talks about how then you walk back onto that same stage, but everyone's a friend. And we
Mhm.
did that because Noah didn't like that part. He didn't feel it worked for him. But when we got the feedback from about a dozen people that they actually really appreciated it, he changed his tune the way I got feedback on my chapter 5 about all the musical terms. And everyone said, cut it. So, we crowdsourced it. We got people engaged, and then we were in a deeper dialogue about what we intended to say. And that made the book in the end all the more strong because you might think you're saying something clearly, but if somebody interprets you differently, you'll never know unless you talk to them what they actually read or heard.
Understood. Right. And I guess that's kind of just an important thing to think about, especially just it helps you to refine the book as you're going along too. So hopefully by the time you release it, it's, acceptable to a wide audience and people engage with it and enjoy it. And there's no other kinks to be worked out. So it's a strategy I recommend any author, implement. So it's great that you did that too. Really important
So I
stuff.
will I, I will say, I have many friends that intended to write a book. They never finished it. A lot of people were really complimentary that I set out to write a book. I said I'd do it, and then we had it come out. Going
Right.
back to what you referenced as a composer, like nothing's ever perfect. There are things that I would change in everything I've created, things I listen to I would do differently. But you just have to accept that if you want to do it, you have to get it to a phase where you have to be willing to let it go. And so many people get caught up on the perfection of it. They actually fail because there's no such thing as perfection. They think they'll achieve it. And what they're really doing is stalling because they're afraid that what gets out there might not be as important, big, or interesting, or whatever that goal they're after as they want it to be. I had delusions of grandeur of the way my book would happen. Some of it way surpassed what I expected, and others have not. But last night in an event, I met somebody who had read my book independent of knowing me and quoted the book to me. And it sent shivers down my spine
Oh, I
because
imagine.
somebody quoted what I said. And it actually came from one of the parts of the book I thought I conveyed the least well, but it's in the eye of the beholder.
Understood. Yeah, I guess it isn't in the eye of the beholder, but it's so cool that you have that sort of feedback when people are quoting back to you. I think that's every author's dream. So congratulations on that for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, it goes to show that you're making an impact. And speaking of the impact, something tells me that this book isn't quite the last step in your journey and your initiative here. What else can we be excited for in the future for what you're doing? Do you have any other books that you've been thinking about? Perhaps any courses? What's on the agenda?
So, no more books, at least for the moment. This
Okay.
was a labor of love. I put it out there. This one had to work because you can't build your brand on being the connection orchestrator, orchestrated connecting, then come out with a book called Orchestrating Connection and have it be average or a failure. We had to see if we could make this big. But everything I'm doing is part of a larger system. I made a strategic plan 4 years ago. This is year four. I have one more year left of it before I have a crisis of faith and see if I really got there. So the
Mm.
goal was become a thought leader in the space. Take the community that I run and take it from New York to national to international, and that's now where it's heading. I do 40 to 50 events everywhere from London, Toronto, and around the United States, and expanding every year we go. I've launched a startup which is called SOAR Connect. SOAR stands for Strength of Authentic Relationships. And that's going to come out of beta in a few months. I'm still in the midst of raising for that next round to systematize the way we can build trust through technology using AI, but making
Mm.
it human centric. And all of this is part of a larger goal to make relationship value valued and put the connector at the core. And so what's coming out of beta, which you can see on our orchestratingconnection.com website at the moment, is a connector personality test that shows people which of the 8 archetypes of a connector they may be or may be leaning
Oh.
towards, along with whether they're a super connector or not. And then paired with that are sort of the tendencies. If you're a certain type of connector, then here are the takers, the specific types of takers that you may fall prey to. So we start to think about not just how we act in a generous way as a connector, which I believe everyone can be, but how we look out for those people that don't have the same more pure intentions that we have. And so that's the big part, and that evolves maybe this year. I promised myself it'd be fall, but life seems to be getting in the way to rebuild on my podcast, also called Orchestrated Relationships.
Oh,
And
okay.
that Noah and I are going to co-host together to focus on this idea that, and this is all comes from the book, people who you think of as famous and successful, they all can trace back to the moment that an introduction changed their life. And we want to trace back not just to that moment, but all the work they had to do to be ready for everyone to suddenly discover them. And that puts the work focus on the work you can do on your own, and the community focus on the community coming around you to get ready for that moment that somebody drops out of a Broadway show and it's you. That moment when your manager gets hired somebody else and you get the job to step in. When you're sitting there as a startup founder and you're at an event you didn't think you would go to with a migraine while one of your friends is having a hard time, but you meet somebody there and you talk about your friend and how you want to help them. And then 3 months later, you have the check to close your round. And so all these ideas of what it takes to get to that moment. So that's the full plan. After that, um, I'll probably try to sleep a little bit longer than I do currently when I wake up at 4 or 5 to get to all this. But
Wow.
it's been the same problem. People are really happy to receive
Mm.
relationship value and intros. They are often really happy to take it, but it is really hard to get people to ask for what they need, for communities to demonstrate that they need to uphold everyone to a higher standard, and to move the world from transaction or power dynamics that shouldn't exist, and to move us into a world where our communities can actually come together and help the world get better instead of push us apart as they are currently.
Understood. Well, I mean, amazing and noble endeavors that you're taking on here. And I just have to say, I really love that quiz that you mentioned. I think that's a really cool interactive way for people to get, a good handle on where they're at and where they need to improve upon. Love that idea. So, yeah, guys, we're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today so you can check out everything David's doing and stay in the know. And, hopefully one day you will get more sleep, like you said. But it's really cool that you've been dedicated so much that you're taking the time out, putting forth the effort, and I think that's what we can all learn from and be inspired by. So thanks for sharing
Thank
that
you.
with us. So as we begin to wrap up today, I'm wondering if you have any last bits of advice for the audience out there, anything that perhaps you wish you knew when you first got started writing that could help others as they start their own paths.
You know, as I mentioned before, if you're going to write something, you have to figure this out. Are you writing this for yourself or are you writing this for a greater goal? Because no one really cares about what you're doing or what you think unless you can come up with something, whether it's an incredible fiction story or a business book or a memoir, whatever it might be. They're only going to care if they can see themselves in your journey, and it's going to be worth their time to read it. And that's, when Noah and I were thinking, like, should we write a book? Is there enough there? Even though we knew my community is an incredible place to be. And the way I speak about this is always well received. There's a lot of books about this, whether it's Give or Take or The Go Giver or, Never Eat Alone. There's so many that were incredible books that are out there. And we had to figure out, do we have a place in that? Should we have a place? And so most people just want to tell the story in front of them. So for any author that's working on something, I soundboarded this. I talked about what I was going to write about. To get to the synthesis of what I just talked about with the podcast of those 2 moments,
Right.
that took over a year of conversations with people to figure out if you actually would want to listen to that podcast. Because if I have an executive or a celebrity or a major athlete or somebody there, do you want to hear them tell their story about how they started as a kid, in the stock room and then became a famous producer? Or their mom gave them a basketball when they were 8 and then they became a WNBA star? Like they've told that 1,000 times. So, how do you tell it differently? How do you share something that is actually worth hearing for people to hear their own story in? I think too much of us get caught in our heads, and just around this world. In our narrative, this is beautiful. I soundboard everything that I do. I take that live improvisation that I do as a musician and I throw that into every part of who I am because I'd rather get the harsh feedback before I spent a half a year trying to write something. I'd rather, tell somebody a story and have them, check their watch halfway through and go, okay, I didn't keep them captivated. And I'd rather push things out, especially to look at this, because my network theory is different than a lot of others, and say, okay, you can disagree with me, but come to one of my events and see it in action. And then I
Right.
realized my events work beautifully. The way I was pitching it and the way I even wrote about it wasn't. So that's the best advice, especially for authors with your focus, Danielle. Like, so many people, they can't wait to get to the end result, but they don't actually focus on the middle part, the journey, which is life. And in this case, writing. You have to love that part, but you have to be willing to push through it and know that where you're going to get is worth getting to.
Right. I guess that's what you have to do is kind of keep your eyes on that end goal, make sure it's worth getting to, and put the effort forth to make it happen rather than maybe dwindling, feeling a little bit scared or nervous or whatever it might be that's holding you back. Just do it. I guess at the end of the day is what we can learn from this, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've written over 200 works. Everyone says you should write a different work. You should take this part and write a different piece. And I go, okay, that's great. And then I just write a new one. I improvise a new one now. Like my Instagram feed, which didn't exist 4 months ago because I had my mom and somebody I didn't know as my followers. Like now I put out a new improv every 2 to 3 days of me with a quote from my life and this book, improvising piano.
Mm.
It keeps me creative, maybe some stuff will go viral. If not, I'm continually doing it because I feel that there's something valuable for me by pushing it out there, even if no one listens. And that's the courage that so many people get caught up in. The terror and the fear of it. But I always say to friends that are stuck, would you rather have been somebody who talked about what you were going to do, or somebody that just did it and figured out you'll do it better the next time?
Understood. Right. That's something to think about and a good question to ask yourself. And I think that's a great note to leave everybody with today as they continue with their day is to just ask yourself those questions. So it's really powerful advice. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been a very insightful conversation, and I think we have a lot to learn here. Between the 5 principles and the questions to ask, and the importance of connection, it's a wealth of information. So, again, guys, we're going to have the links in the description box of this podcast today, so you can go ahead and click on over and get in the know and get connected with David, and of course, check out his website and his podcast and everything coming up soon. And in the meantime, everybody, just remember that you can do the same thing. Go ahead and write your own book. Offer people practical tools they need to have and to hear. So, with that being said, have a great day and keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.